This is The Download from Sounds Profitable, your daily source for the essential news of the business of podcasting. Brought to you by Spreaker from iHeart. I'm Tom Webster. Here's what you need to know for today, Tuesday, February 13th. First, from Cumulus Media, podcast consumers engage with social media and listen to episodes within a day of release. Back in October, Cumulus Media and Signal Hill retained Maru Matchbox to conduct a survey of 608 weekly podcast consumers for the fall 2023 edition of the Podcast Download Report. This week, Lauren Vitrano looks at the data and how it relates to how podcast consumers interact with their favorite shows on social media. 56% of respondents follow their favorite podcast hosts on social media, and that's higher when you look at younger demographics. That's up to 68% for respondents 18 to 34. Weekly podcast consumers have a tendency to quickly find episodes and listen right away, with 67% of respondents listening to their favorite programs within a day of release. And when you narrow that down to heavy consumers of podcasts, more than 6 hours a week, that number jumps to over 3/4. Digiday Research reports that most publishers grew their ad offerings last year with a focus on branded content. Digiday Research surveyed over 300 publishing professionals in the last quarter of last year. Of those surveyed, 56% grew their ad products last year, with a good portion of that growth being attributed to branded content. 58% of respondents said their companies added branded content this year, making it the top category of new ad product added last year for the respondents who took the survey. For a podcast perspective, we reached out to Shannon Martin, who's the podcast strategist at Lower Street, for some comment. She noted, "We continue to see growth both in use of branded content and in greater sophistication in how it's being deployed. That trend appears set to continue, as evidenced by the overwhelming response to our recent Brand Podcast Summit, both in terms of attendance and engagement. 37% of attendees were directors or higher, 21% were founders, and 65% had existing branded podcasts that they were adding to or growing, and the rest intended to launch a branded podcast this year." And again, that's from Shannon Martin at Lower Street. Branded content is no new addition to podcasting, but in recent months, the industry has become more vocal about its capabilities. Adweek tells us authentic multicultural narratives create true diversity in audio advertising. Audio's secret weapon is its intimacy and authenticity, something that Studio Resonate multicultural creative director Antonio Francisco Lewis stresses is especially important for audio advertising. Among other issues, audio advertising runs into the challenge of communicating diversity while not veering into stereotype. A person with a broad, standard American English accent could very well be of Latino heritage. Creating an authentic, multicultural ad creative requires more than just leaning on ethnolects to communicate the intended demographic, including having creative directors working on the creative that have the right backgrounds to understand the nuance required to communicate with the intended audience. AdExchanger reports on subscriptions, the endangered species. In response to a report last week from Axios claiming premium subscriptions are fading away, publishers are pushing back. While news publishers in particular are struggling to find footing in a world where advertisers are avoiding hard news, subscriptions are not the issue. As AdExchanger notes, publishers with strong subscriber bases tend to outperform those who more heavily rely on ad revenue, such as The Economist, Bloomberg, and the Financial Times. Further evidence for the health of premium subscriptions? The healthy growth of podcasting, as more platforms than ever offer premium subscription offerings. And Variety reports that SiriusXM is to lay off 160 employees. That's about 3% of their workforce. The layoffs were announced in a memo on Monday from CEO Jennifer Witz. She writes the move aims to make the company more efficient and flexible, and the write-up includes a spreadsheet of major company layoffs sorted by date and lists what was downsized. Also this week in the digital non-audio edition of the Download, we have a great data snapshot from our friends at Podscribe. And this is from their most recent report, which partners will be able to find in our research database, but you can find the graph and all the data that we're talking about by going to the newsletter version of the Download today. And the data today talks about how podcasting outperforms streaming audio by up to 80%. It's a look at the differences in median visitor rate and median purchase rate between podcasting and streaming audio. And that's kind of cool because we talk a lot about podcasts being more lean forward and keeping listeners' attention. And this data, I think, shows that very well. Be sure to check out the links to every article mentioned right in your podcast listening app or at soundsprofitable.com, where you can also subscribe to the newsletter version. The download is written and produced by Brian Barletta, Gavin Gaddis, and me. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Tom Webster. Download us again tomorrow.